our first talk for 2021. I'm Heather Arnold. Everyone knows me, but I'm Heather Arnold, local history librarian here at Case Kidinia Libraries. And our guest speaker today is Jane Rivett-Carnac, who is now the president of the Narre Warren and District Family History Group. Jane, today we'll be talking about convicts, exiles and criminals. So thank you, Jane, and you can take over now.
Okay, now, first of all, I have 4 convicts in one family. So this is my interest in convicts started way back when. I always knew I had a relative who was a convict. I just didn't know 3 of his brothers were also convicts. So I don't say that I'm an expert in this, but I have become quite interested in exiles, which is the people who actually came to Victoria. And most people sort of know that the convicts were transported to New South Wales and to Tasmania, and it's for a long time was believed that we didn't have convicts in Victoria, but we do have convicts in Victoria. They just have a slightly different name. And apart from South Australia and the Northern Territory, every state had convicts of some description sent to them at some point in time. So when you're researching and you come across that brick wall of I can't find the ship, depending on the time frame, you've got to assume that there's possibility that the missing ship is because they were convicts. So the important dates that you need to remember is New South Wales, 1788 to 1849. 80,000 men and women were transported to New South Wales. Now, some of them finished up in Tasmania as convicts and were then released. Then there was 70,000 convicts sent to Tasmania. Queensland convicts came into New South Wales and they went to Moreton Bay and as convicts. And then in 1850, 2 ships with 500 men were sent to Moreton Bay and they were classed as exiles. Victoria's exiles arrived in 1844 to 1849 on 9 ships. And West Australia, which was a free settlement, had 18 years of exiles sent there to help build the colony. They were very, very short of manpower. Convicts also came from other places than England, Ireland and Wales and Scotland. They came from various parts of the Commonwealth, not that it was called a Commonwealth then, but there are convicts who came from India, they came from other parts of from Hong Kong, from various places. So don't just sort of assume that your ancestor might not have been a convict. There were convicts who came out from America to New South Wales. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you're hunting for that missing person, that they could have been a convict. Now, I'm going to mainly deal with the exiles or the Pentavillians. This was a early 3 modern, they were called modern prisons. And the idea was that the men and young boys who were in there for a crime that wasn't considered as serious, they were still, you know, they maybe have stolen a handkerchief or whatever, but they were deemed as being people that could be rehabilitated. And they actually agreed, they had to sign an agreement to come to Australia to finish out their service of their 7 years or whatever they'd been given, and that they would not return to England until that service was over. So while they were in Pentonville or Parkhurst, they were actually trained in trades and skills that might be useful in the new colony. They were taught, to be bootmakers, carpenters. They did basket weaving. I'm not sure that basket weaving was something you needed in Australia, but that was one of the things they were taught. And their behaviour was judged as, yes, they were suitable to come out to Australia. So they also provided the labour and skills, particularly in West Australia, to build the government buildings, and civic buildings, roads. They were fundamentally labourers, but they were also earning money, because once they arrived in Australia, they were given a conditional pardon, which meant they could be employed. They just couldn't go back to England until their time was up. So this book, Convicts of the Port Phillip District, is a must read if you've got convicts in Victoria. It only deals with the exiles. It doesn't deal with people who've finished their sentence in Tasmania and come across to Victoria. It doesn't cover people who were assigned to a squatter and they've come down to Victoria to set up in the Western District or somewhere like that. It is literally just the 9 ships that came into Victoria carrying the exiles. When they arrived, there was a big hoo-ha in the press about having convicts in Victoria, but they needed the labourers. And especially as it sort of, the time frame was just before the discovery of gold. So these men were really important, because once gold was discovered and everybody went to the goldfields, these men actually, most of them stayed in their jobs or working for the squatters that they were assigned to. Not many of them went to the goldfields, which is quite interesting. Now, there's been hundreds of books published about convicts in every aspect of their life, but not many for exiles. Ian Wins, who's published a number of books in conjunction with the Geelong people, he wrote a book in 1996 called The Exiles and the Pentavillians. There is also a very interesting letter that's at the State Library of Victoria that's been digitised. It was published in a magazine called the Cornhill Magazine, and it's a letter that was written by an exile to his brother in England who had just been convicted, and gives a good example of what it was like from the convict's perspective, of what it was like back in England, how come they got convicted, how come they came to Australia. It's digitised and you can look it up at the State Library. There's another excellent thesis online through the University of Melbourne by Colleen Wood. Colleen, I think for a long time was a member of the GSV, and she had an ancestor who came out on the Marion, which was about the 4th or 5th ship. She did, her first thesis was about all the convicts on the Marion, and then in 2014 she did her thesis, which you can download as a PDF from the Melbourne University, and it has a huge amount of information in it, the background of setting up the exiles system. It's got mini biographies, it's got photographs, it's got a really long bibliography of all the places that she used in her research. The only downside is it doesn't have an index. So you are sort of going to go flip to the back of the PDF and start looking, because it does list all the ships one by one. But she got, I think, something like 50 descendants of these men, providing information on their families and what happened to them after they arrived in Victoria. So a very interesting read. The other thing you need to think about is, if your mystery person was down in the Portland district, is to have a look at the records in Launceston and Hobart, because a lot of people, when they were freed, there was a problem with work in Tasmania. So they made their way to Launceston, and then they made their way across to Portland and the Western District. So you can find a lot of information on convicts from Tasmania through the historical societies and family history groups down in the Western District. They also tended to, well, a lot of them, stay in the employ of the man who first gave them employment. They stayed in the local areas, although they did move to other regions because of work, but a lot of them actually stayed with those people. And my great-great-grandfather, Joshua Atkins, he spent 50-something years working for Sir James Dowling, who he was first assigned to in Caningala in the Hunter Valley, just north of Dungog. When he first came to Australia, he on the convict everything, all the paperwork says he's Joshua Joseph. The minute he got his pardon, he changed it to Joseph Joshua. His brother was convicted at the same time as him. Joseph was 20, his brother Benjamin was 26. Benjamin was one of the men who arrived in New South Wales and he didn't behave, and he was sent to Moreton Bay, and he spent the rest of his life in Queensland, and he died in Maryborough in Queensland. He didn't marry. He was married when he left England, and not long after he arrived in Australia, his wife assumed that he was dead and never coming back, and she remarried. So that it was interesting tracking the two brothers, but I knew that the other two other brothers had come, and finding them wasn't so easy. Ezekiel, who was the youngest, he came to Victoria and was in Wangaratta when he got his absolute pardon. And George, the fourth brother, he arrived in Victoria on the St. George Seymour in 1845 as an exile. And George married and he settled in the Winchelsea district and raised a family, stayed there till he died. But then I had a problem because I lost Ezekiel. And I couldn't find him for a long time. I found the paperwork for his pardon. But it turns out he was one of the rare convicts who, he worked hard, he saved his money, he actually paid his voyage back to England in 1864. He married, and in 1881 census, he's living in public housing with his wife and two children, not far from where he was born in Bedman in Hertfordshire. So your convicts can be a bit of fun. I had the fun of having four, and they managed to do 3 different things for me. But it gave me the chance to read a lot of records, to find out where the trail can go, where you need to look. There are obviously a lot of records held in New South Wales and in Tasmania. If you're looking for the ones who were sent to Norfolk Island, a lot of those records are in New South Wales, and some are duplicated in Tasmania because the convicts sent to Norfolk Island finished up down in Tasmania around New Norfolk. And there is a book called Exiled 3 Times Over, which is the story of those convicts. Records relating to West Australia are mainly held in West Australia or in the National Archives, and records for the Exiles for Victoria are with the Public Records Office. So there's all sorts of things you can find in these records. So starting off obviously with the First Fleet, you've got passenger and crew lists, and you can find with the Exiles, the 9 ships are all listed on microfiche at the State Library in Victoria, but they're also now in a lot of books, like my favourite Convicts on the Port Phillip. There's also a book that was written about the Calcutta, which was the first ship that sailed directly from England to Tasmania. Plus you've got to remember that quite a few convicts that landed in New South Wales were sent to Tasmania, they were sent to Hobart and to Launceston. So you've got those things to look for. The muster rolls, which is from 1800 through to 1837. It's not every single year, but a lot of those are indexed and available online, plus the New South Wales 1828 census. And you think, well, it also includes a few free settlers. It includes things like the soldiers who came out to guard them, who then decided to stay. Then you've got the paperwork that it was generated to keep track of all these men and women. So the indents and assignment registers. Now, if you go online, sometimes you'll find them as a transcription. Sometimes you'll find them as a photocopy. You should look at both. The transcriptions, as we know, could have spelling mistakes in them, date mistakes in them, because they're a transcription. If you're looking at the actual document, it's always best to do that and compare the two things. Ticket of leave registers, because not every man got a ticket of leave, but a lot of them did. There was conditional pardon registers, an absolute pardon, and a certificate of freedom. The certificate of freedom, every man and woman who completed their sentence received a certificate of freedom. So it's one place to go to look for these things. And they're all in different locations, but they're worth having a look at. You should make a list of the ticket of leave, pardons, etc., and systematically go through and see if you can find your person on all these documents. Your ticket of leave you could get for good conduct. It was for a specific place and they had to carry it on them at all times. So somebody in New South Wales got his ticket of leave, and he might have been the other side of the border, and he applied for permission to come into Victoria to work, or the Port Phillip district to work. He had to get his ticket of leave authorised to transfer across, and he had to carry it on him every day. Conditional pardons. This was a case of they could not return to the UK, but they were classed as free men in Australia. A lot of information on these documents, description of them, any extra information about where they were, obviously the ship they came on. Some of them are hard to read, but they're worth reading. And if you got a conditional pardon, it was published in the papers in Australia and back in the UK, so that everyone knew it was published. And if you happened to turn up and you didn't have a full pardon, you'd be promptly sent back to wherever you should be. So Trove is another place where you'll find that following the chain of where could they have gone and what are they doing. Then there's all the applications and things that the convicts applied for. If they were here for life or for 15 years or 7 years, they applied to get married. Now, some I've come across have applied to marry 2 and 3 and 4 different women at different times. And they also had a convict death register. They could apply to bring their wife and family to Australia. You could find information on children of convicts who were baptised down in Tasmania, and that's a very interesting website. The Colonial Secretary's Papers has got a huge amount of information about the convicts, all for all of Australia. They had bank accounts. An application for indulgences was things where they applied to sleep out of the barracks, or to, if their wife or husband was a free person, they could apply for the one who wasn't to be assigned to them as a worker, so that a husband and wife could live together. They could apply to be released from irons because they might have done something, got clamped in irons, and they go, well, I've been a really good person, I think you should take these off now. There was the paperwork for that, and they could apply to have their sentence remitted. So all that paperwork is out there, and it's a case of make a list and check every single place you can and tick them all off. Now, the court and prison records are available. Back in the UK, you've got the Court of Session records, the Exiles records, the Old Bailey records. The Old Bailey records have their own website, which is fabulous. And prison health registers are available for the UK. And in Australia, we've got our government gazettes, police gazettes. In Victoria, we had a number of prison hulks in Port Phillip Bay, and their records are at Prov. And we have jail admission books for people who did things like more crime when they were here, or for the free settlers who broke the law when they were here. The jail admission books give you a lot of information. So you think, okay, where am I going to look? Ancestry is, I guess, where we all tend to go. They have 29 data sets specifically covering convicts in Australia. They also have the England and Wales Criminal Register and the UK Prison Hulk Register and Letter Books. And the thing with the three major websites is some have transcriptions, some have the originals. You need to look at both. You can't just look at one thing. If you go to Find My Past, they've got 23 data sets. They've also got the criminal register, but it covers a longer time frame. They also have Scotland records. They have police and jail registers for Manchester and York. What were the other ones they have? I'm looking at my list here. They had some other really interesting ones, and I can't find it. Plymouth and Devon. They also have a thing called the Surrey Institute Records, which is prisons, workhouses, schools, hospitals, and poor law records, which has a lot of information. They have the Irish prison registers and Petty Session Court records, Dublin Metropolitan Police for the later time frame, and a lot of Find My Past records are originals, not transcriptions. Then we've got Family Search, and again, they complement the other two groups in the fact that some of the things are the same as you can get as Ancestry. They're just presented in a different format. Some of them are indexes only. Some are originals, but Family Search has got a lot of information there for convicts, and Family Search is free to look at versus going to the library or paying for a subscription for the other ones. And then there's the homegrown convicts who were criminals here in Australia. So if you look at the bushrangers, people who got into trouble, they left a paper trail as well. And for Victoria, our Public Records Office is the place to look. The register for male and female prisoners is online. The prison hunk registers, if you wanted to go and look at those, you've got to actually go to Prov. I don't believe they've been put online yet. And then you've got police gazettes and government gazettes, and the newspapers and local family history groups have all got information or people who can help you track down your criminals here in Victoria, and the same applies to the other states. So one of the ones that I was looking for was the lovely Charles Sanger, who was written up in all the papers as being a bushranger at Kyneton. And in his record, apart from the fact it gives you every single time he was in jail, which I think was 7 times over quite a period of time, it has 4 sets of photographs from when he was first convicted through to the last time he was convicted, and it was just such a bonus because you can see him age to a man who still seems to have really bright face, but he'd been in and out of jail for about 20 years. And reading further after he got out of jail, he became, I guess, a bit of a hermit, went bush, settled himself out in the bush near a little creek, had his own veggie garden. But every time something happened in the area, like a chook went missing or somebody lost a piece of clothing off their clothesline, everybody accused Charles, the bushranger, of doing it. It turned out that, yes, he'd done a few things, but he'd never actually did anything like hold up anybody. He never did the rob the stagecoach. He was just somebody who lived a different life. And I found him a very interesting character, but the amount of information that was there in his files at the Public Records Office, which is online, and I did it from the kitchen table, was absolutely fabulous, because I also found these photos and I thought that was just great. Okay, not everyone's going to have that success, but if you don't look, you won't know. So with the government and police gazettes, a few of them are already online with Trove. So you've got the New South Wales Government Gazettes and Police Gazettes. So we all know Trove's there. The New South Wales Government Gazettes for that time frame includes Port Phillip Bay. So the Port Phillip district, if you're looking for things in the 1840s, more than likely going to be in the New South Wales Government Gazette. You should have a look at it if you're looking for somebody here in Victoria. If you're looking for our government gazettes, as you can see, they're at the State Library of Victoria, started in 1844, and the Victorian Government Gazette was 1851, which followed on. They're digitised online through the State Library, and they cover a huge amount of things. People who absconded, people who were being looked for from interstate, so that if the policeman had been promoted, if a policeman had been caught, it wasn't just the convicts. If somebody had a grievance against the person they were assigned to, there's those sort of things. Wives who did a runner, men who did a runner, all those things are in the government police gazettes. Very, very interesting reading. And there's also government gazettes and police gazettes for New South Wales, Queensland, West Australia. Quite a few of them are in our library for the Narre Warren Family History Group. We've got Queensland and West Australia and South Australia, and some for New South Wales. But you might also want to look at other family history groups, like the Tasmanian Family History Group, which obviously has a wealth of information for convicts in Tasmania. Maitland and Beyond Family History Group is very extensive records for the Hunter Valley district, and there were a lot of convicts who were assigned into that area. Or you might want to, you might be lucky and have someone off, the First Fleet. There's groups like Descendants of Convicts and Fellowship of First Fleeters, where you can apply to join them, you prove your relationship. But apart from that, these groups have newsletters, they've got a website, they're helpful, and they give you other leads on where to look. State Library of Queensland, West Australia and South Australia have also got a lot of records for their states. Queensland Library for the Exiles, which was 1850, for the Moreton Bay area, they've got quite a lot of records there. They've also got links back to New South Wales records. And you've got Facebook and Google, so more places to look at, because there is now groups on Facebook for convicts. And if you join those, like having somebody sit next to you and say, did you think to look at so-and-so? These groups will all help you. Now, these are some of the gems that we've got in our collection with the Geelong police records, because 4 of the exile ships went to Geelong. They didn't come up to Melbourne. So there's quite a lot of connections in those records for exiles. We've got the Parkhurst Prisoner Register, for if you think your people might have come into West Australia, and ticket of leave registers, the Index for Convicts, colonial convict movements, and the government and police gazettes for Queensland, South Australia and West Australia, which are all going to help you hunt down that person. Other places to look, obviously, is the Tasmanian State Library and Archives, and those people who heard Heather's talk last year on the Tasmanian records would remember it was predominantly on the convicts. So go back to what you learned that day and go back to Tasmania. Then there's the Founders and Survivors Project, and a few years back we had one of the ladies involved with it come and talk to our group, and they've got really, really good records on their site, a lot of biographies, a lot of information, a lot of photographs. The Female Convict Research Centre is also another one. Obviously, they're only looking at female convicts, but those women married, so you find information about the men. Port Arthur and the Cascades Female Factory both have websites. They're not great, but they do give you information that might be useful. Then we've got important things like the Australian Joint Copying Project, where the records have been digitised. They're now available through State Library, National Library, online. A lot of information relating to anything to do with convicts. The New South Wales State Archives and Records and the Mitchell Library, they've got things like the ship's journals, doctors and surgeons' journals, extra correspondence between people who'd been assigned, ministers. There's records there where, can't think of the minister's name. He was a travelling minister in New South Wales, and he noted every time he baptised a child whose parents were convicts or the father, he made notes in his book, and that was at the Mitchell Library, which was really interesting. Hyde Park Barracks has got a wealth of information, and Parramatta Female Factory also. If your people are in New South Wales, go and have a look at these things. The Old Bailey, this is from Find My Past, and it's obviously a transcription. And you go, well, that's great. I went to Find My Past. Here's my Sylvester. But it doesn't, it infers that as he's the victim, that's all you need to know. But if you actually go to the Old Bailey website, there's the actual page from the recording for the Middlesex jury, showing that Sylvester was the victim, but he wasn't there. It was his goods that were stolen. So I didn't think he should be listed as a victim. For me, I thought victim meant he must have been bashed or shot or something. Wasn't at all gruesome. He just lost a couple of loaves of bread. But it's the difference between looking at what's on Find My Past transcription versus go and look at the actual record, which is, just you've got to do it. Now, the digital Panopticon project is a bit like the Australian Joint Project. It's huge amount of digitised records in the UK relating to many things, but the convicts and colonial records and transportation records that are there are extensive. There is so much information and lots of photographs. So if you can't solve your problem here in Australia, this is somewhere to go and look, and especially to find out what happened before they came to Australia. All that background or information on how many times they've been to trial for various other things is here, and it's fabulous, interesting reading. So this is some of the things that you can find. This is from the link that gave me the baptism of children of convict women down in Tasmania. It gives you the child's name, the date they're baptised, when they're born, mum's name and the ship. It doesn't give you the father's name. But if you were looking for James Wilkinson, at least here you find out his mum's name, Sarah, and the ship she's on, and when he was baptised. I thought that was really interesting. I haven't come across that for the other states, but it possibly is out there somewhere. It's just not been digitised yet. This is for the Orphan School down in Tasmania. This was interesting because it tells you that the child, John Smith, he's listed as an orphan, but he's obviously not an orphan. There's his mum and dad. That's the ship mum came out on, the date he's admitted, when he's discharged, and it tells you that his mother is now a free person. So that was great information about a supposed orphan, but obviously she's working and can't look after him in that time frame, that 4 years, 5 years. So that helps you fill out what your family are doing and finds those extra people in the family and shows you other places to look. This one is where the wives and children of Irish convicts are coming out to Australia. This is from New South Wales. Gives me the child's name is Philip Riley. He's on the Whitby in 1839. He's from Dublin. He's 7 years old. His mother, Eliza White, is on board with him. So it's telling you that his name is different to his mother's name. So possibly she didn't marry, and possibly Riley's the father, but it's giving you clues when you're going hunting to find people. This one is from the digital Panopticons. I think I'm saying that right. I thought this photograph was just priceless. For a 10-year-old, he was sentenced to 1 month's hard labour. These photograph albums that are here give you so much information. And to find a photograph from 1873 of a 10-year-old child, he may never have come to Australia, but it might be one of your relatives back in the UK. It's just a bonus in filling in the holes and making your people come to life. Huge amount of information, and even though it's only for a few years, it's 626 prisoners from Wadsworth Prison, but there are lots and lots of other prison photographs albums on this website. State Library of South Australia has its transportation and convicts section. It has a quick link which takes you to the Irish transcription records, which is part of the joint copying project. I found this link actually the fastest way of getting to them. There are obviously links to various things between the state libraries and the National Library. Some work better than others. I just found this one quick and easy. Then, as we listed before, convicts had bank books. Well, not like we have a bank book, but I found it really interesting that in 1837, this female convict had £3 in a bank account held in her name. She couldn't get to that money until she'd finished her sentence. And if she was to die, that money would be used for her funeral. And it was surprising the number of women who had money sitting in a bank account here in New South Wales. And they were all listed by the ship that they came in. So if you know what ship your convict came in, you can search via the ship name through the savings books, bank books, and some people had 3 and 4 entries. Very interesting reading, lots of specifics about what could or couldn't be done with the money, how people had money sent from England. And Catherine wasn't somebody who was a well-to-do person. It's a lot of the men who are listed in this book with money were people who were clerks who'd been accused of fraud or misappropriating funds, etc. So they were people who were educated to the extent they could read and write, and they were working as a clerk. Catherine was a housekeeper, and I found out that she had taken a candlestick and sold it, and that's how she finished up being a convict. But she had income come to her. People who still had relatives in the UK who died and left them an inheritance, their money would be put into the bank account in New South Wales and they could access it when they died. And I thought, how really interesting that you wouldn't consider those sort of things if a convict you thought of was, you know, down and out with nothing. Quite a few of them had bank accounts. This is my Ezekiel. His return here, it's New South Wales, and it's telling me it's in the Van Diemen's Land, convict returns and letters, but it's for somebody who's based in Wangaratta in Victoria. So the paperwork sometimes can be in places you don't expect it to be. I know this is his pardon. He's a farmer, he's up in Wangaratta. It tells me what ship he came in on, and it's over 2 pages. It's informing that His Excellency is pleased to recommend his absolute pardon. And it was not long after he got this absolute pardon that he went back to the UK. Now, Find My Past has got the New South Wales Government Gazette indexes, has got my Joseph on here, tells me he's asked for a convict indulgence. And this was the first time he applied for marriage, but it doesn't tell me that on here. It just tells me that he's applied for it and he's in Dungog. So looking at the originals, this is the actual original of his application to marry. He's still known as Joshua here. He's now 27, and there's his intended. She's a native of the colony, but her parents were both convicts. So back at Find My Past, this is their transcription of that document, but it doesn't tell me that important thing that she's a native of Australia. So you could think she's another convict, but she wasn't. Then the convict indents, these go across 2 pages in the file. So you need to figure out how to read them. It's the printed version. It hasn't got any, as it says, no notes on there. Here's my Joshua down the bottom. He's 20. That's his brother Benjamin there at 26. This George isn't my George. This is another one. But he's also listed as a farm labourer. There's the 2 arriving in February 1838. Now, if you go to the next page on that schedule, it gives you a description of them. And, you know, both of these are ruddy-faced, freckled farming guys. They got light brown hair, hazel eyes. The thing that broke me up with the description about them is eyebrows meeting. And the reason I laugh so much is because so many of the males in my dad's family, their eyebrows are meeting. And one of my nieces absolutely hates her genetics because her eyebrows meet and she has to pluck them all the time. But there it is, confirming the genetics handed down, your eyebrows are meeting. It's a little thing that makes your family more connected to you, is when you see something like that and you can go, yep, okay, bad luck, Courtney, there it is. So, and this is one of the prison hulks. This one is on the Thames, but it's very similar to the hulks that were here in Victoria. They tied them up at in Port Phillip Bay, far enough out that they couldn't swim to shore, took all the masts and everything off, and they lived on them for quite some time. So the other thing, I guess, is to use Google. Put in the person's name, add the word convict or transportation, and see what comes up. A lot of the times you'll get those magic links to other places to go looking. If you happen to go to the Public Records Office, you'll find things like, I think it's still the same thing, the Public Records Guide number 57, which was convict records. It's handy to get a copy of it. It lists all the things they've got. You can tick them off as you go through and say, yes, I've checked there. Yes, I've checked there. I've checked here. That's now available. It's online. And they have guides for New South Wales, for the other states. So those things are always good to look at. Then you might find yourself in Perth on holidays. Then you could pick up a brochure, and I can take me back. I was in Perth, and I can see me, so wait a minute, I'll hand this across. This brochure was a convict trail for Perth. It's a 2-hour walk around Perth with all buildings built by their exiles. It was a great walk. You can find convicts when you're not looking for them. When we were in Fremantle, we went to Fremantle Jail. They had a huge exhibition there on the women from Parramatta Female Factory. So it's a case of, if you're looking for your convict, spreading your net wide. Look everywhere. Don't just look where you think they're going to be. Go and hunt for them everywhere you can think of. So that's it.